Well, hey everybody, it's Mr. Schauber, and welcome to our college basketball presentation on my list of the number 25 to number 11 countdown of greatest players in college basketball history. Now, like I said, this is my list, and I've done a lot of research and and I've watched a lot of some of these guys and things, but your list may be a little different, and but I'm also going off of what other college basketball experts and pundits have said. So I tried to get this as close to what a lot of people would consider accurate as possible. So, but anyway, it is an opinion, so opinions differ. But here are my top 25 numbers 25 to 11. Number 25, Cale Russell. He was a forward at Michigan in the mid 1960s. You can see what he did there: 27.1 points per game, 8.5 rebounds, an excellent free throw shooter, excellent shooter overall. He led Michigan to 3 straight Big Ten titles while he was there, and 2 Final Fours. They made it all the way to the championship game in 1965 and lost to an amazing UCLA team, but got to the title game. He was twice a first team All American, and he was a second team All American as well one year. So 3 times an All American while he was there. Uh, he was the AP Player of the Year his last year there at Michigan, and as well as the Helms Foundation Player of the Year. Before the Wooden and Naismith Awards, the Helms Foundation gave out a Player of the Year award that was kind of, really that was one of the big awards. Okay, it was really prestigious. So he was kind of the Player of the Year that year in 1966. But Cale Russell would go on to have a good pro career as well, and but he was one of the great basketball players of the 1960s. Elgin Baylor is has been described kind of as Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. Elgin Baylor was an unbelievable talent. He could do everything on a basketball court. He went to little Seattle University just for a couple of years, and you can see, I mean, just see what he did. They were 45-9 while he was there. He averaged over 31 points and almost 20 rebounds a game. So he was almost in that group of 20, 20 and 20 for points and rebounds. But he was 31 points a game and almost 20 rebounds. Uh, he led Seattle University to the championship game in 1958, and they played Kentucky. They lost to Kentucky in that title game, but he was the most outstanding player in the Final Four that year. He was just the best player in college basketball. He was just amazing. Uh, Helms Foundation Player of the Year, first team All American. He was a second team All American the year before in 1957. Of course, he would go on to have an unbelievable career with the Lakers. He's one of the greatest NBA players of all time, but he was just unbelievably good and just talented. He could do everything. He was just shoot, rebound. He was so athletic. He had crazy moves around the hoop. Elgin Baylor was just one of the greatest. And speaking of Michael Jordan, if Elgin Baylor was Jordan before Jordan, well, here is Jordan. A North Carolina guard and small forward. Uh, Michael Jordan played with some excellent players at North Carolina, but he was just a supreme talent. He left after his junior year to go to the NBA, and you can see led North Carolina or helped North Carolina win a championship, an NCAA championship, his freshman year. In fact, he hit the game-winning shot in the championship game that year in 1982. Both his sophomore and junior years, he was a first team All American. And his junior year, he won all the awards: the Naismith, the AP, the Rupp, the Wooden. He was just in a different league. Okay, he was just in a different world. Um, because of when he came out of college, he also played in the 1984 Olympics in LA and won a gold medal. And then, of course, he was on the Dream Team, and he was the headliner of the Dream Team in 1992 Olympics in Barcelona, Spain. So, yeah, absolutely, Michael Jordan kind of he came into his own. You know, he was he was he was really good in high school, but he just kept getting better and better and better. And then when he got to the pros, he kept getting better to become arguably the greatest player of all time. So that is Michael Jordan, number 23 on his jersey and number 23 on my list. Number 22, Wayman Tisdale, an Oklahoma center. Kind of undersized center at 6'9", but 220. He was a big, filled out, strong guy. He 25th all time in scoring in NCAA history. He averaged uh, over 26 points and 10 rebounds a game. He is one of the rare three-time first-team All-Americans in college basketball, and he was three-time Conference Player of the Year in the Big Eight, now known as the Big 12. He was on that 1984 Olympic team and was a really good NBA player for a number of years, and then became a really good, not just a hobby, but a really good jazz bass guitarist for a number of years. He unfortunately passed away far too soon at the age of 44, but Wayman Tisdale was one of the dominant players in college basketball history while he was playing. Speaking of dominant, Patrick Ewing. How would you like that picture up there on the upper left? How'd you like that guy coming at you, slamming it in your face, right? Patrick Ewing played 4 years at Georgetown, and he was the number one high school player in the country. Uh, he Everybody wanted him, and Georgetown in Washington D.C. landed him. He grew up in Jamaica and came to the U.S. when he was a young teenager and learned how to play basketball. And grew to be 7 feet tall, 240 pounds in college. I mean, he was not just a tall, skinny guy. He was strong. He was filled out for a college player. He led a dominant attack at Georgetown for a number of years. You can see, and 121 wins and 23 losses is all while he was there. He was 15 points, almost 10 or over 9 rebounds and 3.5 blocks a game, and he helped Georgetown go to 3 straight Final Fours, and they won the title his junior year in 1984. He was the most outstanding player that year of the Final Four, and he is also a three-time first-team All-American, twice the Big East Player of the Year, and his senior year, Naismith, AP, and Rupp award winners. So, everybody wanted him out of high school, and then everybody wanted him out of college. He'll end up getting drafted by the New York Knicks and play for the New York Knicks for almost his whole NBA career and have a Hall of Fame career. So he was also on that 1984 college Olympic team. I mean, they were loaded, right? Jordan and Tisdale and Ewing, and then he was on the Dream Team in 1992 also. Patrick Ewing, one of the great centers in college basketball history and pro basketball history. And speaking of great centers, Wilt Chamberlain. Chamberlain may be the most dominant player in basketball history, period. Uh, he just was a freakishly gifted athlete for any era, and especially for the 1950s and 60s. He was just unbelievable. 7'1", 240 pounds. He played at Kansas, and while he was there, he was an All-American both seasons that he could play varsity. Now, he couldn't play varsity his freshman year. Freshmen weren't allowed to play varsity basketball back then. They had a freshman team they played on, but he played for 2 seasons and was twice an first team All American. Uh, his first varsity season, they went to the championship game, lost in one of the classic championship games in triple overtime to North Carolina. But he was the most outstanding player of the Final Four that year, and he just was. I mean, he was so gifted for being a 7'1". I mean, especially in that era, we hadn't seen a guy that tall, that athletic. It just didn't happen. And so, Will Chamberlain was way ahead of his time. As a freshman, this just gives you an idea. As a freshman, and Kansas was always good. As a freshman, he led the freshman team to a victory over the varsity team in a scrimmage, scoring 42 points and grabbing 29 rebounds with 4 blocks. I mean, can you imagine? And then in his varsity debut, first game in 1956-57 season, he scored 52 points and had 31 rebounds. He was unstoppable. You couldn't. He blocked everything. You couldn't guard him. He had great moves under the hoop. He was just in the in another world. He also did track and field at Kansas. Ran the 100-yard dash in 10.9 seconds. He was fast. He shot puts 56 feet, and he won the high jump in the Big 8 3 straight years. So he was an all-around athlete. He's one of the great athletes we've ever seen in this country. And at 7'1", he was an unstoppable force on the basketball court. Of course, he would go on to have a Hall of Fame NBA career and be one of the dominant players in NBA history. Maybe the most dominant, just all-around dominant players in basketball history, period. Rick Barry is one of the great shooters in basketball history. Number 19 on my list. He played at the University of Miami, and he was a small forward, 6'7", 205 pounds. Miami was really good while he was there, mainly because of him. Averaged almost 30 points and 16 and a half rebounds a game. Led the nation in scoring his last year there with 37.4 points a game. Just completely dominant. He also would go on to be a tremendous pro player. He played in the ABA, the American Basketball Association, which was a pro league that competed with the NBA for a while in the 70s and in the 60s as well. And he led the ABA in scoring, and he also led the NBA in scoring. So he's the only player to do that, lead college and then the ABA and NBA in scoring. First team All-American his last year at Miami, and he, like I said, would go on to be one of the great shooters we've ever seen in pro basketball history as well, helping the Warriors win a title in the 70s. So he was just awesome. Bob Lanier is he's number 18 on my list. You can see he was dominant. Played at Little St. Bonaventure, and he led them to the Final Four in 1970. 6'11" center, big, strong guy, 250 pounds, great shot blocker, great scorer under the hoop, rebound. I mean, he was pretty dominant. Over 27 points and 15 rebounds a game for his career. And he was a first-team All-American as a senior. He was a second-team All-American as a sophomore. He couldn't play varsity his freshman year, so they just didn't allow that back then. And so he he came right out of the gates as a sophomore and was awesome. He was 3-time Converse All-American though, all 3 years while he was there. And the basketball court at St. Bonaventure is named after him. He's of course a college basketball Hall of Famer. He would go on to have a great career in the pros, and he was known for having these huge feet. He had a huge shoe size. In fact, they used to do trips around the country. The train used to go. It used to be a thing where trains would take oddities or kind of cool things and go from city to city where the railroad lines connected, and people knew ahead of time what day the train was going to be, stopping in their town or near their town, and so you could go see the stuff that the train was exhibiting. And one of the things for a while the train would take around was his shoes, because I'm trying to remember, I think he wore a size 22 shoe, something like that. It was just so it was kind of that he was as famous for that as he was for his basketball playing, but his basketball playing was awesome. Austin Carr was a Notre Dame guard for 3 seasons. He is one of the great scorers in college history. You can see he averaged almost 35 points a game, and he holds the tournament record, the NCAA tournament record, still at 41.3 points a game. He played his best basketball when the lights were brightest. He was second in the nation in scoring, both his junior and senior year, and he holds the NCAA record, 61 points in a game, 25 shots made, okay, on 44 attempts. His senior year, he swept all, pretty much all the awards: Naismith, Helms, AP. First team All-American, of course, his senior year. Second team All-American his junior year. He was the number 1 overall pick in the 1971 NBA draft. He was good in the pros. He wasn't as great in the pros as he had been in college. And again, some of these guys in college, they are just so dominant, and they get to the pros, and for whatever reason, uh, their game doesn't quite translate to the pro game, or maybe they've tapped out as far as their talent level, and they don't improve much, or there's a myriad of reasons why some guys just aren't as great in the pros as they are in college. Sometimes it's a bad fit, the team they're on, or they kind of get happy, they get fat and happy with the big contract, and so they stop working hard. But so that happens to some guys. But Austin Carr was just a really good player, and he was good in the pros, but he was never as great as he had been in college. But he definitely in college was one of the dominant players we have seen, no doubt. Bernard King is an interesting story, interesting guy. What a nice guy. Uh, Played at Tennessee in the mid 1970s, and he was from New York City, and he decided to go to Tennessee to play basketball, and there was still some racial tensions down there, uh, and he was the target of some racism. It was really unfortunate. While he was there, he because of that, he kind of felt alone. He felt isolated at times, and he got depressed, and unfortunately turned to alcohol for a while to try to forget about his problems. But on the basketball court, he was so gifted. A 6'7" forward who could jump and run the court and handle the ball and shoot from the inside, shoot from the outside. He was just awesome. Uh, Almost 26 points and 13 rebounds a game while he was in college. He led the nation in field goal percentage as a freshman. So by this time, freshmen had been allowed to start playing varsity. Finally, in the 50s, 60s, they couldn't play varsity, but in the by the mid 70s, they were allowed to play. He was 3-time SEC Player of the Year as a freshman, sophomore, and junior. Okay, he left after his junior year, and first team All American as a junior, his last year there. Second team All American as a sophomore, and then he would go on to the pros and have an awesome career in the pros. I remember growing up watching him play toward the tail end of his pro career, and he was just such a dominant scorer. He could score from anywhere on the court, and the thing that derailed him in the pros was he had injuries. He had quite a few injuries that just kind of cut his career short. But man, when he was on his game and healthy, he was so good, and he was so fun to watch. So that's Bernard King. Bob Pettitt is one of the great early college basketball players. LSU forward and center. Bob Pettitt was a almost 28 points a game, over 14 rebounds a game. Led LSU to the Final Four in 1953 as a junior, and he was a second team All American that year as a junior and first team as a senior. He was 3-time All SEC, sophomore, junior, and senior, and he led the SEC in scoring all 3 of his varsity years. He got his number 50 jersey retired. He was the first LSU athlete in any sport to have their number retired, which is quite an honor, obviously. And he was just awesome. He would go on to the pros and lead the Hawks, the only championship in Hawks history. He led them to a championship, and so he was great player. He could do everything that you wanted a forward and center to do back then. So he was a little ahead of his time. In fact, he was if I'm not mistaken, he was the first 20,000 point scorer in pro basketball. And so, yeah, he was great. Ralph Sampson is number 14 on my list. He was just so dominant. Um, so dominant. He was a 7'4" center. And you're saying, well, of course he was dominant. He was 7'4". Well, yes, but he was athletic too. He wasn't just a big oaf. He was athletic. And he could, man, of course he could block everything. And he averaged 3.5 blocks for his career. Um, he was so dominant around the hoop. He averaged almost 17 points. Of course, 11 rebounds. He gobbled up everything. Um, he was just really, I mean, you can imagine having him on your team. Um, he helped Virginia win the NIT championship, and he was the MVP of that tournament in 1980 as a freshman. And then they went to the Final Four as a sophomore, um, and he's one of those rare three-time first-team All-Americans. Okay, sophomore, junior, senior year. In fact, he also is. There's only I think a couple of them. Three-time Naismith College Player of the Year. He won the. He was basically the College Player of the Year 3 times: sophomore, junior, senior year. Okay, 3-time Naismith, 3-time AP Player of the Year, 3-time Rupp Player of the Year, and twice the Wooden Award winner. So I mean, not many guys in college basketball history have as many awards to their name as Ralph Sampson. I mean, there's basically maybe one or two others that are up there with him, but that's it. He definitely one of the dominant players of all time in college. And he would go on to have a really good pro career too. Unfortunately, his career gets cut short uh, by injuries, but while he's healthy in the pros, he's fantastic. He played for the Houston Rockets and was really good. So Virginia retired his number 50 jersey. Okay, of course, he's a college basketball Hall of Famer. Number 13 is George Miken, played at DePaul. George Miken was the kind of the first great big man in college basketball history, and kind of becomes the first great big man in pro basketball history. Then later on, he played at DePaul basically during World War II. All right, 6'10", 245 pounds, but at 6'10", he was taller than pretty much everybody back then. Of course, now we got 6'10" guys all over the place in basketball, but not back then. And I love the old pictures. I love how the old college, the old just basketball jerseys in general, the uniforms I should say, had the belts right on the shorts because they didn't have the elastic waistbands to hold the shorts up. And the shorts were short, okay. But he had the classic glasses look, right? Number 99, you gotta love it. So while he was there, of course, DePaul was dominant. You can see the record, 81-17. He was over 19 points a game. He introduced the hook shot, brought attention to the center position, and emphasized how important it was to have a really good center. The big man dominated basketball back then. He led the nation in scoring, uh, both junior and senior years, and won the NIT championship in 1945 and was the MVP of that tournament as a junior. Back then, the NIT championship was probably bigger than the NCAA championship during the 1940s. Of course, that would all change before too many years. But he was twice the Helms Foundation Player of the Year, junior and senior year, which is basically like the Rupp or Wooden Award or Naismith today. But so 3-time All-American, okay, and of course the College Basketball Hall of Fame inductee. Like I said, he would go on to be kind of the first great big man in the pros, and he would lead the Minneapolis Lakers to, I want to say, 5 championships, kind of making them the first dominant franchise in pro basketball history. So his career was just full of accolades, and he's one of the, because of that, he's one of the great, not only players in basketball history for his era, but one of the great influences on basketball in college and pro history. Number 12 is Jerry West from West Virginia. Jerry West had the classic crew cut look. He was All-American boy, and he could shoot the lights out. He's one of the great pure shooters that basketball has ever seen. Jerry West was awesome, okay, at West Virginia. He was a guard at 6'2". You can see the record Virginia had, or West Virginia, excuse me, had while he was there. I mean, they were dominant. He was almost 25 points a game, over 13 rebounds a game. Mr. Clutch was his nickname. He got that in college. Of course, he continued that on into the pros. The only player to score at least 25 points in 8 consecutive tournament games, led West Virginia to the 1959 NCAA championship game. His team lost, but he was named the most outstanding player of the Final Four. Twice a first-team All-American, and he was a gold medal winner after his college career was over, before his pro career started in 1960 Olympics in Rome. He would go on to have a Hall of Fame career with the Lakers, one of the great players in NBA history. In fact, he is the logo of the NBA. The NBA logo that has that guy dribbling the basketball, that's him. They patterned that logo after Jerry West. He was kind of the guy that if you were a young kid and were learning how to play basketball, you wanted to learn how to play like Jerry West. He was an all-around excellent player, offensively, defensively, one of the great competitors we've seen, and yeah, absolutely Mr. Basketball, right? So yeah, he's the NBA logo, but he's definitely one of the great college players of all time. Number 12 on my list. And the last one on this presentation, number 11, Tom Gollan. Played at LaSalle, 6'6" forward, and LaSalle was awesome while he was there. You can see almost 21 points a game, almost 19 rebounds a game. His career rebounds at 2,201 are still an NCAA record. He led LaSalle to the NIT championship in 1952, and he was the co-MVP of that tournament, and then led LaSalle to the NCAA championship in 1954, and he was the most outstanding player in that tournament. So he's the only player to win a Final Four, most outstanding player, and NIT MVP in his college career. Three-time first-team All-American, the Helms Foundation Player of the Year in 1954. Of course, his jersey at LaSalle is retired, and he was just such a great player. His anticipation was awesome. To be a great rebounder, you have to have great anticipation, where the ball is going to come off the rim and the backboard. You have to have great positioning. You have to have great timing for your jumps to get the ball. You just have to have the instinct to know where the ball is going to be, and the discipline to be in the right position, and Tom Gollan, yeah, the best rebounder in college basketball history as far as total number, and would go on to have a good pro career too, but not like he was in college. In college, he was just a dominating figure. So that is our list of number 25 down to number 11 in college basketball history. I hope you enjoyed the presentation.